It was 9:50 at night. I was deep into my prayer list when I realized I was worrying. I was thinking that if I didn't mention every person on my prayer list to God, then something bad would happen. Then, to top it off, I started thinking about the next day and what I needed to get done, with the assumption that I'd miss something important. Needless to say, my worrying meant that it took me a while to get to sleep. Hi, I'm Michael Burrows. I'm trained in clinical psychology and have run a successful clinic helping people with anxiety for the last 11 years. And today, I'm going to walk through what the Bible has to say about worry and what we can take from the hints in there to have something practical to do to work that worry down. I'll go through the exact technique I use myself to get to sleep in less than 15 minutes and what I've used with hundreds of people to successfully reduce down their worry and regain peace of mind. So what is worry, and is it the same as anxiety? I like to think of anxiety as too much adrenaline when we don't need it, a mistake in our thinking that means we think there's a threat when there isn't. Worry can cause anxiety, can cause this mistake in our thinking. It's a thinking process where we make predictions about the future, but solely in a negative way. We're only thinking about possible bad things that could happen. We even picture these predicted futures in our visual cortex, which then passes on these images to our amygdala, which can't really tell the difference between real and imagined. So it reacts with way too much adrenaline, otherwise known as anxiety. When we've got lots of anxiety going on, a lot of the time, it can cause us to pull away from all risk and shrink our life right down. Psalm 37 verse 8 says, "Do not fret, it leads only to evil," while other verses speak of the pointlessness of worry. In Ecclesiastes 2:22-23, you work and worry your way through life. And what do you have to show for it? As long as you live, everything you do brings nothing but worry and heartache. Even at night, your mind can't rest. It is all useless. In Matthew 6:27, can any of you add even one moment to his lifespan by worrying? Worry is talked about quite a bit in the Bible. The Greek word for to worry is merimno. You can find it in 17 verses of the New Testament, usually translated as to be anxious or split in many directions. But Paul uses it a few times positively. We'll come back to that. Jesus spent a fair bit of time warning his disciples against worry. In the Sermon on the Mount, he told them not to worry about what they would eat or drink or about what they would wear. He repeated the same command in Luke 12:22, finishing with the idea that God takes care of all our needs, just like he cares for the birds. How much more valuable are you than birds? He scolded Martha for allowing her anxiety to control her, Luke 10:41. He even told his followers that they need not burden themselves with worry about their response if they were hauled into court. Mostly the message we get about worry is that we don't need to do it. It's an unnecessary burden, which makes sense as worry is a protective mechanism we have to try and predict danger, but often becomes more expansive and catastrophic with practice. It's even a lot more conscious than some other anxiety we might experience and is very accessible as a thought process. We'd be able to articulate it if asked, as long as we could stand the embarrassment. This is because the rational part of our minds, our prefrontal cortex, is actually joining in. It's an active thinking process. We do it because we hold a belief that it's a good thing, that it protects us by guessing the future and allowing us to prepare for it. And it being an active thought process gives us even more wiggle room to catch it and change it. But before we get into that, predicting danger to ourselves and others sounds like a good thing. Why would we want to give that up? Paul uses merimno to describe concern for others rather than only thinking of ourselves, and to talk about single people being able to focus on spiritual matters rather than their spouse. So is worry or caring intensely ever a good thing? I think it comes down to how we're thinking about the future, how catastrophic our predictions are, and where God is in our future picture. Because that determines whether our thinking is making our life bigger, growing our heart for others and for God, or smaller in a bid to stay safe. Worry can easily mean we end up ineffective in the life God has for us. Luke 8:14 covers this. Jesus said, "The seed that fell among thorns stands for those who hear, but as they go on their way, they are choked by life's worries, riches, and pleasures, and they do not mature." Worry as a process only thinks about things going wrong, not problem solving what to do or including what God can do. Interestingly, a lot of our worries are about things we can't control, like whether there's another war or a family member ends up in a car accident. And so the thoughts just spiral around and around. We can only do anything in the present. We're not actually in the past or the future. There's plenty of research showing that staying in the present makes for a happier, more effective you. Matthew 6:34 goes, "Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." Now, if you're like many of the people I've talked with, you're like, "I've heard these scriptures before. I get that I'm meant to stop worrying, but how do I do it?" Let's see if we can find any hints about what the Bible recommends we do about worry. Psalm 55:22, "Cast your burden on the Lord, He will support you." Philippians 4:6-7, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." And 1 Peter 5:7, "Leave all your worries with Him, because He cares for you." So the hint seems to be to leave our worries, cast them off. And this is an active thinking process, remember. So there's something in that, something we can do with this. Now that doesn't make it easy. So what do we get for what's going to be hard work? Isaiah 26:3 says, "You, Lord, give perfect peace to those who keep their purpose firm and put their trust in you." If your brain's been spending a lot of your free time worrying, perfect peace sounds good, right? So is this just praying and then trying to play no-take backsies? No, and I'll tell you why. Worry is a self-reinforcing cycle. If you worry that you're going to have a terrible night's sleep and then you have a terrible night's sleep, the brain goes, "See, we should have been even more worried." And if we sleep fine, it goes, "We worried, then we had a good night's sleep. The worry helped." If worry's got a proper hold of you from repeated rounds of that cycle, then you'll have a strong belief that you need to think really hard to prevent danger. The risk of jumping into a certain style of prayer, praying away the danger, is that the brain can interpret that kind of prayer as us doing something to save ourselves. And it keeps us believing that we need to keep worrying to have a safe life. Now, maybe we have an answer if we combine this hint with top psychological research on worry. There's a technique that enables you to create a worry-free zone by putting the worries aside, casting them off, leaving them for a bit. This challenges the belief that worrying keeps you safe. If you go for a period of time without worrying and it turns out safe, that feeds back to the brain that worry isn't necessary for you to stay safe. And we can bring God back into the picture in a way that isn't seeing prayer as something we do, which will actually be more reassuring for our brain as He's back to being a loving and powerful God. So the practical how-to for this technique, called worry scheduling. You'll need a way of writing down your worries, as if you just tell your brain that you'll think about it later, it'll worry that you'll forget and just try to think about it now or keep it in mind, which just means you're thinking about it. So whether you prefer a journal, scrap piece of paper, or your phone notes, jot all the worries down as they come up. Assure your brain that you'll be coming back to them and you can't forget what they are as they're written down. The other thing you'll need is a time to come back to the worries, pray, be thankful, and balance your thinking. I find it's best to have a set time each day that's set aside for this, like over breakfast or after dinner. This should be only about 10 minutes, definitely no more than 20, as we want your brain to see that it doesn't need to worry, it can just trust. you do need to take this time, as this promise to your brain is what makes the whole thing work. If you say you'll come back to the worries and don't, it's going to get harder to let them go next time, as your brain won't trust you to come back to them. So, notice you're worrying, write them down, and come back to the present knowing you'll come back to them at your set time. Then, at your set time, balance your thinking, reduce catastrophizations, and thank God for providing for you and sorting these things out, trusting Him to do so because He's trustworthy. Then practice, practice, practice to renew your mind into a more helpful pattern of thinking. Romans 12 verse 2, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. So, if worry is a struggle for you, give this a go and let me know how it goes for you. And pass this on to someone you know who could benefit from knowing what to do with worry. Romans 12. Here we go.